Well, I'd like to welcome you all today to this momentous event. I say momentous because this is a first time that we've had a recognition such as this for the people who were conscientious objectors, pacifist conscientious objectors during the First or Second World War. I shouldn't be standing in front of them, should I? And who also did civilian public service. As far as we know, the people who were in the First and Second World War who participated in civilian public service rather than going to war are all recognized on this plaque. We haven't recognized on this plaque those people who were COs in later wars. Remember that only those wars where there was a draft would the question of conscientious objector status come in. During the First World War, there wasn't a conscientious objector status, and so the first person on the list, Jesse Brandt, for whom the residence hall to our west was named, and who was the dean of the college for many years, was in fact imprisoned when he said he was a conscientious objector. By the Second World War, through the work of the Church of the Brethren and the Mennonites and the Quakers and other denominations, there was an opportunity for men to declare their status, and sometimes their draft board would accept that, and if they did, they were allowed to go to civilian public service. I might add that in earlier wars, such as the Civil War, where there also was a draft, brethren were forced to, in certain cases, to fight. I know that Dr. Marlon Heckman, who is writing a book that will accompany the plaque out in the hallway, told me that several brethren, in fact, had to fight in that war. So today, we want to recognize these men who participated, who, if you will, worked for their country in civilian service, and yet were able to keep their consciences intact because they, in fact, did not believe in war. And so we have Delmer Stanley, we have Ray Lehman, pardon? Rodney, I'm sorry. And we have Chuck Davis and Claire Hannibal here with us today. And I'm going to let Chuck Davis start. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask all four of them to give us a 5 to 10 minute presentation on what they did, what they believed, how they were treated. And if we have, after that, roughly half hour to 40 minutes, questions and answers, we'll open that as well. But Chuck today brought some pictures from his time, so I'm going to let his go first and start us out. So Chuck Davis.
Thank you.
I love you. You talk us.
Okay.
Let's got to close this.
Sorry. Okay. This, as he mentioned, we served and responded to the draft in a way that enabled us to maintain our beliefs and be able to take care of, to give work that was comparable of national importance to the United States government and to this nation.
So how do you
And thank you. I was assigned to Camp Angel on the Oregon coast, and it was a former CCC camp that was built, and then the war came, and so CCC was no longer in operation. And so the project that this camp was built for had been abandoned in a sense. So and we can read that. I'll read it to you so we'll have it on the sound. Since October 42, these men have devoted 8.5 hours a day for 6 days a week to work of national importance under the direction of the CIOS law National Forest officials. This work has resulted in the planting of 2.5 million trees on the 9,000 acres in the Blanchard Tract, the construction of 9 miles of gravel roads, the building of 3.5 miles of fire trail, the crushing of nearly 10,000 tons of rock for road surfacing, the maintaining of 37 acres and 6 Forest Service parks, and the assistance of suppression of 7 fires in Oregon and Washington. So you can see that the Forest Service was without help to do this kind of work that needed to be done. Next one. Sorry. Okay, you can see what the area looked like when the COs were brought in. This area had been logged during World War I for the spruce trees that were used in building airplanes. And through the years, it had never been reforested because perpetual fires were burning through there and destroying all the brush and everything. So it was a disaster area. And you can see the kind of terrain that we had. Take the next one. And you're a little ahead of where I want to be, I think.
Oh, you want
but nevertheless, I'll talk about it. We had to build roads because the area had been logged by train, little tiny engines and that kind of thing. And so we had a lot of trestles that were built, and the area needed to have roads built. So we had big equipment like the bulldozer, but we also needed to have the gravel so they could go through with their cars. And so there was a rock crusher. People came down over the top of that cliff and hand drilled holes so that they could put dynamite in. We blasted it all, then knocked it up. It came with mallets, sledges to break it up so it could go on the rock crusher to crush the road, the gravel to put on these roads. Now we did have heavy equipment. Next one too. Go ahead. Oh, okay. Well, we didn't just do that kind of work. There was maintenance work that we did also. If you're ever in the coast of Oregon, you find out that everything grows. Weeds, vines, brush, whatever, ferns, and so the roads become, and trails, and everything becomes overgrown with vegetation. So we spent a lot of time doing this too. At noons, we had a lunch. Generally, it was a canteen cup full of milk, 4 sandwiches, and maybe an apple or an orange or some kind of fruit like that. We often toasted it. Firefighting was another aspect that we were involved with. I fought fire in Oregon and Washington, and it was an important part of our activity for the Forest Service that area. Okay, of course we had to take care of our own needs too, so they did a lot of wood cutting, and some of the wood that we cut was the spar trees that were left when it was logged with donkey engines and big long cables. And this is one of the trees that I helped to cut down. You can see how big it is. The other guy's taller than I am, so he was probably 6'2" or something like that. And took a while. I think we had this much of a draw on the saw when we were standing up on what do you call them? The springboards that you put in a notch in the side of the tree in order to get it down. Okay, next please. Okay, this is a picture of Bill Everson. I'll talk a little bit more about Bill later on. But he was one of the highlights at the camp and a driving force in the activities after hours. And he was a poet. But this is a boss that was there, an older retired guy that had worked for the Forest Service and came and directed what we were to do. We toasted our sandwiches because it was cold and rainy and always raining, and we never came in for the rain. If there was high winds, they would sometimes bring us back in. but every day we came in with muddy feet, and we just washed our boots off under the spigots when they came in to get the mud off, so they could put them by the stoves to dry them out a little bit, so the next day would be all right. Okay, go ahead. Oh, and we toasted the sandwich, but we always had enough moisture on the top that we never could get it really warm. Okay, and plenty of activity after hours. Long days in Oregon. I noticed that when I went up there in June, you know, the sun never goes down in Oregon in the summer. So the hours are long, so there was activity like this deal. We were in these bunk houses, and we each one had a kind of a little closet, kind of a armoire kind of a deal, and then probably a little area, a private area, and then a steel cot with a couple of blankets. Now this gives us a background of the people that were at the camp. You can see that 29% were Brethren, 17% Methodist, 16% were non-affiliated, very high. Now the reason I think that's true is because Brethren were sent to Brethren camps, Friends were sent to Friends camps, Mennonites were sent to Mennonite camps, because they were people that were paying for all of our expenses outside of the work projects. The Brethren raised the money to run this camp. And so, and of course there was no pay, although the Brethren did give us $3 a day to buy stamps and cigarettes.
A month.
A month.
A month.
Okay. I'm glad Claire's here besides my wife.
It was $2.50.
Okay, $2.50.
No, 50 cents.
50 cents? We all got different memories. Well, we all know it wasn't much, I can tell you that. Okay, but look at some of these others. Our Lord of Righteousness, Pentecostal. Oops, we didn't want to go forward.
Yeah.
That's enough though. But there, Temple of the Jewel Cross, Graceland Assembly, Faith Tabernacle. A lot of different denominations that many people had never heard of ended up in civilian public service. Okay, let's go to the next one. I was one of the youngest people there. I was graduated after my sophomore year here. I was 20 years old. And so it was not, there were others that were younger than I, but most of them were 26 and up to 36. And some of those guys at 36 were drafted with families at home and young children, and no support whatsoever to those families. It was amazing how they got along and were able to survive on $3 or $2.50 or 50 cents a month. Okay, with the average, I mean, most of them were in the mid-26. And I think this would probably be consistent of all draftees. Educational level. I was overeducated at 2 years of college as far as most of the people there. And 15% were 8th grade or lower, which is kind of really an amazing statistic, I think, when you think about something that would be involved in something of this kind of thing. Okay. The men have received no pay for any of this work, neither has the government made provision to care for the families dependent upon many men in camp. Food for the men is provided by the Church of the Brethren. Many men with savings are contributing to their own support. Monthly, this camp spends over $1,000 in Walmart. In a letter home, I mentioned that the camp had canned 1,200 jars of peaches in 3 nights. People, earlier we heard mention of LIGO. Well, some of the camps had people that they could send out that were on overhead that would gather local produce and that kind of thing that they could get back. I better hurry up here. Okay, let's go on back to it.
Okay, I'm just supposed to start talking.
Yeah, okay. I have the publications here of the untied press, that were, some of them, that were done at Walport. And when the group came together originally, there were these poets and people who were involved in journalism, and all kinds of people were at camp. And so they wanted to do their thing, and so they had a newsletter that came out called The Tide. So the underground crowd came out with what they wanted to show was the real, what was going on, and they called that the Untied. And they had printed and hold up hold that one up, and the one behind it. Actually, hold up, there's two there together. No, the first one you picked up, picked up two. Okay, the first one is Ultimatum, and it's mimeographed. The next one was mimeographed by that was Glenn Caulfield. The next one, which is War Elegies, was mimeographed and done by Bill Everson, or William Everson, who's sometimes known as Brother Antonius, and was very active in the Beat generation and the poets that were involved in San Francisco. And later on ended up to be a fine art printer and poet in resident at the college that's just above
Santa Cruz.
No, it's the one on the coast, above the Sea Mark.
Santa Cruz?
What?
Santa Cruz?
Santa Cruz, yeah. Ian does.
That's what he said.
What?
That's what he said.
Go ahead.
Okay, let's,
Okay, I heard it down here.
yeah.
Okay, if you want to buy either one, the other one on the lower corner here that you can hardly see, I've got the ultimatum up there, and the one that he held up is the one that I was involved with, and really gave me a part of the direction that my life has taken. No, it's the, oh yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
My dad was a preacher, and he bought, when he was, along with an educator, he bought a little printing press, a 5x8 Chelsea press, and we had it in Kansas when we were in Independence. And to make the story short, he brought it with us when we came to Laverne. And so I sent home, because they were doing this mimeograph, and I thought, gods, I had printed the Campus Times on a printing press down in the basement of Founders Hall, and I knew how to print, and so why not print these books? So I sent home and got him to send out that little press, and we did that on the side there. Now that was, after that they said, hey, this is great, we want to do this, and there were other guys said that were interested in printing, and some transferred in and new printing. So they bought a larger Chandler and Price like we had here at the college, and they printed the rest of these books you see in here. Okay, let's go on.
Yeah, go ahead and talk, because it takes a little while.
It takes a while. Okay. And an outgrowth of this untied press and the printing activity and the other music time. Okay. Okay, that's was an after-hours deal that became fine arts deal, and that was they were set up in various camps. One was peaceful living, the other was had to do with property co-ops and different things like that. Okay, let's go to the next one. Will, and probably. Okay, this is Everson reading on the bigger press we got. Go ahead. And another aspect of what these people did was work in experiments. And this is probably the most famous one, starvation. They would never do this again. But these guys volunteered to go through this starvation project. Let's go to the next one. I was involved with 5 other guys from Walport. We went back to North Carolina, and go to the next one. And we were put in isolation in this big old summer resort hotel for golfers. And we spent the first about 3 or 4 weeks just getting our bodies all adjusted to isolation. Some of the people couldn't take it, so they became orderlies, but others could take it. And I stayed on the 3rd floor up there, and I could look out the window and talk to people who were also sticking their heads out of the needle. So, and we also had people from the who read poetry and plays over the intercom and that kind of activity. So there were things to do. We got magazines, they had order books for us, the newspapers, but we were all alone in our little room.
Yeah.
That's what,
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
leave some time for the
Yeah,
others.
okay. Well, I want to show the next one.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Okay. Then they took us out and they shot down our throat, in each one of us individually, 3 atomizers like a paint gun of scrapings from somebody's throat that was in a military-based hospital that had pneumonia or flu where people didn't get well. There was a flu where people just were sick for months and months and months. They want to know what caused it. So they had 3 groups. I didn't get sick, thank goodness, but the other guys got this sick with this flu where you get sick, and so they discovered it was caused by virus. Okay, well, I'll, if we have time, maybe I could go back and,
Okay, we'll leave it there and
let's go ahead.
let's give it to Claire, because he's right next to you, and then we'll pass it across.
Well, I don't know where to go from there.
Well, tell us about your experience and where you were, and
I was drafted to Belgium, which was a former CCC camp taken over by the Forest Service, and we took our training up in Quincy for fighting fires, and we maintained fire trails and built new trails. But when you first reported to camp, you had to take your turn. The details in the camp, like laundry or in the cooking or the latrine duty. And I remember when I was first on the laundry duty, we went around and picked up all the dirty clothes at the end of guys' cots. And one of the fellas put his wool pants there. Well, I didn't know anything different. When it came back, he was pretty mad because they went up to his knees. Well, anyway, after we received our fire training at the headquarters in Quincy, most of us were assigned out to spike camps in various parts, some in the Pumice Forest, and I was sent up to the Modoc Forest, which is in the corner of Northern California. And so I fought fires up there in Nevada, California, and Oregon. The crew I was on was a 15-man crew, and as Chuck said, we had a wide range of people. There were 15 of us and 7 denominations. A couple of denominations that he didn't mention. One was Fire Baptized Holiness, True Holiness, and then we had a Lemurian. Yeah. Now, a Lemurian is one who believes that there was a lost continent of Lemuria, and they could see people living up on top of Shasta if they were tuned in, and he was tuned in. And we could see Shasta in the distance. Well, while we were up there, to keep us busy when we weren't on a fire, we were building a barbed wire fence, drift fence, to keep cattle from drifting from one range to another. And it was across lava fields, and you couldn't dig, you had to blast holes. And so we would take a jackhammer and blast a hole and blast the rock out, and then we had these posts that the CCC had made out of wood, and we put them back in and pile the rocks around, and you know, it was pretty slow work. Well, we went out on several fires. If it was a big fire, like 300 or 400 men. We were the cook crew and cooked for them, and the crews would be, we had prisoners, we had loggers, we had townspeople, and we were the cook crew. If it was a small crew fire, we were the crew and did it all. And this was before the days of chainsaws, so that if you were sawing down burning snags to keep the sparks from flying over the fire line, it was a 3-man operation. 2 people on the saw and 1 person looking above to see if a limb was going to fall and let you know when to run. After that, I was reassigned to Modesto, to the relief center there, and I see several in the crowd here who had people that were assigned there also. We processed food and clothing to be sent abroad. We baled it. Church groups came in and sorted clothes and mended clothes. One of our men was a shoe man, and we repaired shoes and that sort of thing. And that's I was mustered out then back to Laverne College and finished. It took me 7 years to get through college.
I'm Rodney Lehman, class of 41. I want to say thank you to the Brethren Service Committee for all they did for us in CPS and all the church members who supported us. I'm sure most of us didn't really appreciate the sacrifices that the church's members made for us, and I didn't, of course, have a chance to thank them then, but this is the best I can do for thanking many. The thing I wanted to talk about was something probably nobody else talked about. It's not about the camp particularly. But before I start in on that, I thought I ought to have a joke to tell. So I went to the internet to look for a pacifist or a CO joke, and nothing. It's not apparently a very funny subject. Well, let me talk about that a little later. I did get straightened out on that. When I was talking about the internet, some of these fellows know what Speak for Peace is. This is something you've got your phones with you. You can type it in the window there. Speak for is a number, not a letter. Speak for Peace. You pull that up, and what do you see? The first thing, names: Claire Hannawalt, Dwight Hannawalt, Lloyd Brandt, and some others. You go to the Speak for Peace and look to the home page, tabs up the top, the one that says COs, you punch on that, and here's a whole list of people. I found my name on there even. If you want to ask me how Speaks for Peace, I couldn't tell you nothing. Did we really have an interview with them? I can't remember. I didn't know, was a man or woman that interviewed us? Did they have tape players? Did they have cameras? They made a page for all of us on Speaks for Peace. If you want to know anything about it, you're going to have to go to the internet yourself. Well, I was saved with this jokes thing. One of my friends sent me those things in email with all the jokes or the pictures or all those long things and round and round it. And he sent me a page here of church jokes. I got the idea right then there. I was going to talk about the churches, not the peace churches, some of the others that I found were important. And in this jokes he sent, these are, should I say, divine announcements in church bulletins. Here's one don't let worry kill you off, let the church help. For those who have children and don't know it, we have a nursery downstairs. A bean supper will be held on Tuesday evening in the church hall. Music will follow. You did a little better with your enjoyment of those. I tried these out at the table with my elderly people I live with. The old ladies would smile, and one of them said, "Oh, that's good." You know. I'm trying to shorten this thing up here a little bit. I went to Duke Hospital. And this is the first church thing, the denomination that I want to talk about. If you know, the Peace Church has sponsored all the camps. But when you got to camp, you found a lot, like on that chart, you just saw a lot of Methodists there. And the Methodist Church wanted to do something. And they picked on Duke. That's because if you know Duke history, Duke University had early association with the Methodist Church. The hospital wanted help. The church wanted to help with the CPS group. So they made a deal, and this is the only camp, I think, that the Methodists sponsored. Now, in the hospital, you don't have to raise all this food that most of us had in a regular CPS camp. The church had to put up a lot of money. A lot of people had to help. The hospital ran the hospitals, so we just had the sponsorship by the Methodists. They raised the money to pay for our place big wages. It cost the Methodist Church maybe $30 to $50 a day. We had about 60 people at Duke, and paid 50 cents a day, which meant spending money for clothes and things like that. Well, one day we had the Methodist minister who kind of ran this thing. He had to push the whole idea of getting the Methodists to support a CPS group. And you can imagine in the Methodist Church how, in the South too, how thrilling that job was. And I don't need to describe it to you, but the point about all this was that we had another church of Christian people interested in the pacifist movement. Bob Cochran and I, Bob Cochran's the class of, and I are from Laverne College, and we were the only two fellows from Laverne who were at Duke. Duke had two hospitals, mental hospital a couple hundred miles from Duke University and our hospital at Duke. I was in one and Bob was in the other, and I never saw him. When we were in school together, I asked him, how did you get interested in being a SEAL? If you know Duke or Bob, you know he was not a member of our Church of the Brethren. And he tells me, well, he was a Christadelphian. Well, I was interested in this list. I just saw there were two Christadelphians, believe it or not, in CPS camp. Christadelphian Church is a small pacifist church in England. And there's a few people in Pomona at it, and Bob was one of them. Bob died about 50 years ago, I think, of cancer. But we were glad to have the Methodists helping to support the CPS group. The other group I want to talk about is the Presbyterians. When I was in Diamond Bar, living in Diamond Bar, I was a Presbyterian for a while. That's an experience everyone should have in this life. In the Presbyterian Church, they have a group called the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship. Well, now, I was utterly surprised and delighted because these people are a bunch of live wires. I don't think most people outside the Presbyterian Church remember this or think about this. This Peace Fellowship is big because the Presbyterian Church itself is big. And there are a lot of pacifists in the Presbyterian Church. I went to one of their conferences in the East one summer, and they had 200 or 300 people there. They had national known speakers, they had workshops, they had all kinds of classes. Best of all, they had a lot of the Presbyterian ministers there. And I thought, well, this is the greatest thing since soft bread almost. The thing that the Presbyterians have done, which surprised me most and I was most happy about, was they have, if they've got an annual church-wide offering. Most of our churches, we take relief work offerings, you know, and we take mission offerings. There's all kinds of offerings that come around every year. Well, in the Presbyterian church, they have a peacemaking offering. Well, I thought that was just great. And they raised a lot of money. This money goes to raising this conference they have, but one of the things they support is they send quite a few people down every year to picket at the Army camp in Georgia, building or whatever its name is. They have the School for Americas there. And if you're into this whole area we're talking about, you know about them. The Army trains military officers for South American countries. And this has not been a very popular thing among a lot of church people because they've been picketing this thing in annual demonstrations for years now. And I looked this thing up in Wikipedia. I couldn't believe it. This thing is quite a place in Prairie, because Wikipedia says they have demonstrations down there as high as 10,000 people. And they picket this thing, and they still can't get the thing closed. Why do you want to get it closed? Well, these officers have been kind of notorious. They've been part of some of the dictatorships in South America. And there's any number of international organizations that have indicted them for war crimes. And so there's a big movement to try to, Presbyterians do that.
Rodney, will you tell us what you did at Duke?
Yeah, Duke, I mop floors. I mop floors in the operating room. Nobody really cares what I did. Well, one thing I can tell you I did at Duke, we worked with the student nurses a lot. I finally married one of them about a month before we left. It wasn't quite the life we were living back at Walport and some of these places fighting fires. I'll tell you, I didn't want to talk about Duke, really. But, let me conclude with saying, paying tribute to MASH. I always figured MASH was the greatest peace propaganda we've seen in the TV thing. And I still look at it every night. It's still on.
I think I want to take a little more of a personal approach to this. First of all, I want to thank ULV for the plaque and the recognition that you're giving us. I think it's really wonderful. I almost wonder if I deserve to be here. And I will explain what I mean by that, but I do really appreciate being included in this. I want to start with my own personal history. I was born in Olympia, Washington, lived through high school a block and a half from the small Church of the Brethren. My family were very much involved in it, and I grew up in the church, and I think probably by about age 15 I had decided I was a pacifist. In historical terms, that would be about 1938 or 1939. One of the strong influences I know was the fact that we got a new pastor from a good Brethren background of northern Indiana by the name of Mark Schrock. And he was a strong pacifist and a great leader. He didn't stay at our church very long because he went on to become the director of one of the CPS camps. But I'm sure that I was greatly influenced by him. I graduated from high school in 1941, and in the fall of that year I came to Laverne College as a freshman, and so I was here, maybe a block and a half from here, on December 7th, when we heard the news of Pearl Harbor, and of course the world for all of us changed drastically. I knew at that time that I would be signing up as a CO. I went home in June at the end of the year and reported to the draft board, and I was, I guess, almost surprised compared to some other people. I had absolutely no conflict with them. They accepted me immediately. I think maybe it's because they didn't know what I was. I believe that, to my knowledge, there was only one other CO in the area. He had a twin brother who won AO, but I think it was a pretty lonely kind of situation. At any rate, I I did not think about coming back to Laverne College because I knew I was going to be drafted. About 9 months later, I was called up for the draft, as told to report to the draft board and go in for a physical. So I went down there, and about 300 of us were standing around. We were transported by buses up to Seattle, Washington, to a big processing center, and we all spent the day standing around in our underwear, doing our physical examination with no particular thing different. There was one Marine who came up to me, and I guess he kind of liked my looks, and he started telling me about how I really ought to join the Marines. I could be a sergeant in 3 months. But then he looked at my papers and saw the 4E, and he said, oh, you're something else. The last stage in the physical was the psychological desk. And I think maybe in a minute and a half or two, the psychologist was supposed to decide whether you were fit for service. When I gave him my papers and he saw the 4E on it, he stood up and in a very loud voice berated me for 4 or 5 minutes, telling everybody what a coward I was and all this stuff. And I'm sure he really enjoyed preaching a sermon about me, but gave him a paper and I went on my way. It was several months later it was only about 4 months later that I actually got the draft call, and I was told to report to Walport. And I was given the information. Incidentally, I want to back up just a little bit and talk about the church and the family. In my church, although we had this strong pacifist minister for a while, it was a very divided church, and there were really not very many people who were comfortable with with my status as a 4E. As I mentioned before, there was only one other that I know of, and it was difficult for me to take my position. Many of my friends were very much opposed to what I was doing. In fact, my mother asked me if I was a coward. That hurt. My dad really had nothing to say. So I went into CPS with this concern and loneliness, I guess I would say. And I think as a part of that, I frequently had little checkup conversations with myself. Is this really what I should be doing? Is this what I really do believe? I felt a real need to cooperate with the government as far as my conscience would allow. And at the time, I was certain of it, but nevertheless, I would periodically have a conversation with myself and think it over again and reaffirm my position. Well, in that context, I finally arrived at Wallport. I felt very lonely going down there, not knowing what was going to happen. When I got off the bus driver gave me my suitcase full of work clothes and made a few nasty comments. And I walked across the highway to the Wallport Center, and to my happy surprise, there was Chuck Davis and Lloyd Brandt and Art and Marvin Snell and 2 or 3 others that I can't think of right now. So that was a real pleasant surprise, and I enjoyed my time at Wallport. I worked on the rock crusher. Lloyd Brandt and I sawed snags, and I had a good time. I went on one firefighting expedition up near Mount Rainier. But when November came along, the Forest Service started issuing raincoats and rain hats and rubber boots. We were going to spend the winter planting trees out in the rain. I had grown up in Western Washington and I'd had enough rain. So, Paul Beard and I went down and checked in the CO office a little bit, looked at the bulletin board, and we saw that there was an opportunity to transfer to a state mental hospital way back in Norwich, Connecticut. And that kind of appealed to us. And so we applied, and very shortly we were notified that both of us were accepted. So in about December of '43, I think it was, Paul and I got on the Great Northern Train and took a 5-day trip to Connecticut, and were met by the director of the camp at Norwich State Hospital. We were treated very well there. It was a very well administered CO program, and the hospital was a very large one, and they were desperate for help and workers, and so they were very appreciative of I think there were probably 70 or 80 of us in that particular unit, and we got along very well there. I enjoyed the work. I got to work on the violent ward and had all kinds of interesting characters to deal with, and it was an experience. One of the things that I really noted about it was that the staff and the administration seemed very pleased that we were there. They were very cooperative and helpful, and really appreciated what we were doing. On the other hand, if you met those same people out on the public street, they wouldn't recognize you. They didn't know you were there. It wasn't much. It was overall a very good experience, and I enjoyed my work there. But I would have to say that I continued to periodically check with myself. Is this what I really should be doing? Am I cooperating with the government as much as I think I should? In the summer of 1944, I had been there about 9 months. August, September, Europe had been invaded. The Battle of the Bulge was on. News reports were coming out and telling more and more about Hitler's treatment of the Jews. And I checked with myself again and said, is this what I should be doing? And I decided I could, at this time, go into the Army and serve as a medic, the 1AO classification. And so, in November of 1944, I made the switch. I told the director that I wanted to do this. I had no problem organization-wise. Some of my friends told me off in rather uncertain terms that they didn't approve of what I was doing. But I felt very good about it, and I continued to feel that I did the right thing according to my conscience at that time. So I was released from duty, sent home to Olympia, Washington, to wait to be drafted again. For about 6 weeks, I was a free man, and that was nice. But I was, in March of 1945, I was drafted into the Army, into the 1AO classification, the medics. It was the 6-week basic training program, involved no guns, no weapons training or fighting, this kind of thing. It was a matter of, all we did was learn how to drill and salute the officers and that kind of thing. So I felt comfortable with that, and I still do. At the end of the basic training program, I was sent to Texas for a 3-month surgical technician training, and then was returned to Fort Lewis, Washington, just a few miles from my home, and waited there 2 or 3 months to be shipped overseas. Well, while I was waiting at Fort Lewis to be shipped overseas, September 2, 1945 arrived. The war ended. However, 6 weeks later, a boatload of us were shipped off to Oahu, in Hawaii, to be shipped to various places in the Pacific. We really became the first replacements for the regular troops that were just beginning to come home. And so I was shipped 2 or 3 miles away to Schofield Barracks, a large permanent Army post on Hawaii, in a large medical hospital, and I spent almost exactly 1 year there before being discharged. It's just one little kind of interesting thing. I had taken this wonderful 3-month training in Texas to be a surgical technician. When I, along with about 200 other fellows, arrived at this general hospital at Schofield Barracks, the first sergeant came in and he said, "How many of you guys can type?" 3 of us raised our hands. He said, "Come with me." The other 2 guys went up to the front office. I went with the first sergeant, and I spent my year doing clerk typist work for the first sergeant. So that was my military career. As I say, I think I followed my conscience conscientiously, and I've never had any real doubts about what I did. Although, as I say, I'm not sure I should be included in this group here. But
We welcome you.
I do, several years later, it occurred to me that I didn't know anyone else who did what I did. And I still don't. Maybe some of you know of that kind of thing. I do vaguely remember, maybe some of you can correct me, there was one famous case. There was a movie actor named Lou Ayres who played in, what was it?
All Quiet on the
All Quiet on the Western Front. And he was a CO, and he went to Cascade Locks, I believe it was.
I worked with him.
You worked with him, okay. And then he shortly went 1AO and went into the medics. So I and Lou Ayres are all right, thank you.
Thank you, Delmer. Well, unfortunately, we've used our time, but we are going to have a dedication in a few minutes, and we are going to be outside with refreshments, and you'll have an opportunity at that time to talk with these four men and other people who are here, such as David Werner, who was a CO in the Vietnam War, and Jerry Pence, who some draft boards gave 4Fs, and we have people here like that. So there's other people that can talk about it, but what comes across so clearly here, so very clearly, that when the draft situation is there, people have to consider their conscience. And I so thank you, Delmer, for fully discussing what you have, because we have people in the audience here who were in many different areas. I had a 32 in the draft lottery, in the first draft lottery in Vietnam, and I went in. Other people had their conscience to do the things that they needed to do as well. We have 6 war memorials on this campus, and now we're going to have a memorial to men like these 4 here who took their conscience and worked for the nation in civilian public service. In the future, we're going to put up another plaque in the narthex across from the plaque that celebrates their duties here to show all the people who were in civilian public service during not only the wars but at other times. And we'll have a second plaque to the COs that are amongst us, such as David and Jack Meek and Ken Scambray. But right now, we're going to break, and we're going to go out onto the chairs outside to have the dedication of the plaque.
My name is Zandra Wagner, and I'm the chaplain here at the University of Laverne. As we know, we're here gathered to dedicate a new plaque honoring 42 Laverne College students and faculty who served in world wars and civilian public service as pacifist conscientious objectors. The plaque, which is already hung, and hopefully you saw it on your way in, lists one name for World War I, a faculty member, Jesse Brandt, who was imprisoned for his CO status, and also the father of Daryl Brandt, where is Daryl? There's Daryl. And, oh, who else? And Dorothy, oh my goodness, I don't know all the connections. Many children. Now it's all coming back. The other 41 names are those that served in civilian public service during World War II, which we just heard about in the panel. I want to give 2 special thank yous before we continue. First, we're here today because Daryl Brandt, in particular, saw the importance of recognizing these individuals and honoring Laverne's historic ties to pacifism. Dale Brandt organized this effort, providing countless hours of research to make sure we included all faculty and students that were conscientious objectors at this time. Thank you, Daryl, for your vision, your generosity, your care, your passion, and time to create this living memory that inspires all of us to live in the ways of peace. Thank you. In addition to the plaque, Marlon Heckman, where's Marlon? There he is. Marlon, who was the former head librarian at the university, has generously authored a book to accompany the plaque entitled They Also Served. Is it a 50-page book? Is that correct? Yes, a 50-page book that will provide a historical context, a biography of each of the students and faculty members, and an extensive bibliography of books that discuss this time period and topic. The book is not yet published, but when it is complete, a copy of the book will be placed in a holder just below the plaque. Thank you, Marlon, for volunteering your time in this way and using your expertise to make this plaque a living conversation for future generations. Thank you. At this time, I would like to invite President Lieberman to come to the microphone to say a few words. I know her as someone who has come to deeply appreciate Laverne's historic ties to the Church of the Brethren and its values of peace. President Lieberman.
Thank you, Zandra. That was such a beautiful hour listening to the four of you talk about your life and your values and how you lived out your values. Last year, I co-taught a course with Jack Meek, and the course was on leadership. And one of the evenings, we talked with our students about what are moments that define us and our leadership when we have to make a choice. And that choice that we make might be a difficult choice, but it's because we're a leader that we make a choice that might be sort of swimming upstream. And Jack spent that evening talking about his choice to be a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War. And it was such a moment for me to understand the deep values of the Brethren and how this is so much a part of each person's life, and how making a choice like this is a choice that reflects the whole person and so much of what they believe. And I thought it was a wonderful moment for all of our students to hear from a professor and a man to whom they looked up as a leader in their lives, and he talked about a difficult decision and the right decision for him. And I look around me and I listen to those four stories and I think about your decisions, and some of those decisions were hard decisions. And Al Clark talked about his decision, and they were the right decisions for them, and those are demonstrations of leadership, and they truly reflect who we are as a university. So thank you so much. And thank you for reminding us that it is these values that make us the University of Laverne. Thank you.
Thank you. So in preparation for today, I went back to the Church of the Brethren's statement on war, knowing that many of the names listed on this plaque were inspired by the Brethren position on war. The most recent official statement by the Church of the Brethren was passed in 1970, which was also a reaffirmation of earlier statements passed first in 1785, 1918, 1934, and 1948. So I had not read this 1970 version in years. And reading it this week was really moving, and so I want to share some of that with you, not because everyone on the plaque necessarily shared this statement, but because it carries some of the spirit that certainly feeds into people's decisions. So the document begins with this opening statement. The Church of the Brethren regards with sorrow and deep concern our nation's increasing movement toward a permanently militaristic outlook. And then later in the document, we completely dissent from the increasingly militaristic worldview, and we instead publicly witness to peace because we remain convinced that good citizens in a good society must work out a better way than war to resolve international conflict. Inspired by Jesus' call to love one's enemy or turn the other cheek or put away one's sword, this community said, we therefore cannot encourage or engage in or willfully profit from armed conflict at home or abroad. We cannot, in the event of war, accept military service or support the military machine in any capacity. And then another section, therefore we seek the right of conscientious objection to all war. We seek no special privileges from our government. What we seek for ourselves, we seek for all, the right of individual conscience. The paper goes on to pledge support to those who choose to engage in constructive alternative service, support those who choose open non-cooperation with the system of conscription, encourages even ministers who are given ministerial exemptions from the draft to seek no privilege but to confront the draft on an equal basis with the laity. The statement pledges support to those who choose not to pay taxes that support war purposes and encourages members, as much as possible, to distance themselves from direct association with defense industries, but also charging individuals to be good citizens, involved with public discourse, and doing all of this in a spirit of humility, goodwill, and sincerity. And then the statement closes with a moment of self-awareness and humility. We are aware that there is room for further growth in understanding of these questions and in expressing these convictions. We pledge ourselves to be receptive to new truth and better modes of expression as these come to our attention. I'm inspired by this statement. I'm inspired by the people listed on this plaque and those of you who are actually here today. I'd like to just ask a few people to stand up. If you are one of the people listed on the plaque, or if you are a family member of someone who is listed on that plaque, would you please stand so we can recognize you? We are honored to have each of you here. So please hear these words of dedication. We dedicate this plaque in honor of 42 people who are models of standing for one's convictions, of being willing to go against popular thought, of believing in peace and only peace as a long-term and lasting solution. This plaque represents acts of courage, individual conscience, and strength of character, even in the face of persecution or ridicule. This plaque reflects a long-standing tradition of pacifism here at the University of Laverne and connects us to a world of peacemakers throughout history. May this plaque be a source of learning and a source of curiosity, an inspiration to future generations. May it spark multiple and varied conversations about our human strivings for peace. And may this plaque be a beacon of hope, a still, quiet presence that reminds each of us to search longer, harder, deeper for the things that make for peace. Amen. So before we just open up time for conversation and reception, I wanted to just mention a couple things. First, this plaque and book has inspired an idea for the entire entranceway of the chapel. So we're now in the process of collecting quotes quotes on peace from a variety of different religious and philosophical traditions. And we'll fill this entranceway with some well-chosen quotes about peace. And I think that'll be a really nice entrance, and again, another honoring of this long tradition here at the university. And then finally, as Al has already mentioned, there are some other activities that are being held over the next week or so in a series called Peace in the Heart of War. It's on the back of your program, and we invite you to come to any of these events. Thank you for coming today to help us recognize 42 faculty and students and to honor our historic value of peace. Thank you. Please help yourself to treats and drink.